Howdy, gang, and welcome once again to the Duct Tape Studios. I'm Jeff McAleer, your host here at the Gaming Gang channel. Thanks for joining me once again. Today, I am going to share my review of the Monster Vault for Tales of the Valiant from Kobold Press. This is written by Wolfgang Bauer, Celeste Konowich, Tim Hitchcock, Rajan Khanna, Jeff Lee, J.B. Little, Greg Marks, Michael E. Shea, Brian Susskind, and Mike Wellham. And I apologize if I've somehow mispronounced any of those names. This 384-page hardcover is available now, carries an MSRP of $59.99. You can grab just the PDF alone over at DriveThruRPG for $34.99. All that said, let's swing on over to the other camera because here I've got Tales of the Valiant's Monster Vault. A couple of things I want to mention before we get stuck in. First of all, my friends over at Kobold Press were kind enough to provide me with this review copy, but neither I nor anyone else affiliated with the Gaming Gang has received any other sort of compensation for me to share this review with you. These days, it's very important you know that. We're also not going to look at each and every page of the book, but I do want to give you a really good feel for what you're going to find inside the Monster Vault. All right, let's dive on in. First thing we're going to do is we are going to take a peek at the credits page because there were a lot of folks who worked very hard to bring this book to the masses. In fact, I'll bring this down a little bit so you can see everyone's name. So let's give some credit where credit is due. All right, so this is a bestiary for Tales of the Valiant. And if you are not familiar with Tales of the Valiant, it is a 5e adjacent fantasy role-playing game which recently came out from Kobold Press. I reviewed the player's guide yesterday. So if you're kind of interested about the core rulebook, by all means, check that video out. So we're going to find over 400 entries in the Monster Vault. And one of the things that I really like about this book is that we start off with about 47, 48 pages devoted to understanding these entries. How do you build encounters? How do you balance encounters? And I'll be the first to point out that I come from the old school. I don't necessarily believe in balancing encounters because sometimes your player characters should be fleeing and running away until they go get the holy hand grenade. Or there should always be the risk of a player character or more ending up meeting a grisly doom. But I know there are many game masters out there who fall into the vein of making sure they balance encounters and things like that. So all that kind of information is in here. There's a discussion of the optional Game Master currency known as Doom, which the Game Master can spend to buff the enemies that the player characters are going up against. Of course, it's kind of the opposite side of the coin as far as luck that the player characters get to utilize in Tales of the Valiant. We'll get a breakdown of how do you understand these stat blocks? What do these things mean? We also get into the various different types of creatures. So we will have breakdowns of the undead and humanoids, so on and so forth. Terrain, and how terrain affects not only your encounters, but also the creatures you populate in that terrain. And then I should also mention that later in the book, we will see entries for NPC types as well as common animals. Now, of course, they're not going to be as detailed as we're going to see in these entries in just a moment, but I really appreciate the fact that we do have those kind of common entries in here as well. So, Kobold Press is very well known for the bestiaries that they have produced with their Tome of Beasts. This is pretty standard monsters as far as our fantasy role-playing games. So we're not going to find any like really off-the-wall entries here, which I appreciate because that's what the Tomes of Beasts are for. This is pretty much what you're going to find as far as 5e creatures that are not under copyright, ported over to stat blocks for Tales of the Valiant. And because Tales of the Valiant is 5e adjacent, it's pretty easy to go back and forth with utilizing 5e content for Tales of the Valiant and Tales of the Valiant for 5e. It's important, though, to keep in mind that these are not just rehashes of 5e creatures. Many of these are going to be different in approach and personality than you would see in, say, Dungeons and Dragons. And I love that. That's one of the things I really have always liked about Kobold Press and their approach to fantasy role-playing. They have sort of an old school vibe to the proceedings, even though they release 5e third-party content. So I really do appreciate that. I like their takes on many of the common creatures out there or monsters that get encountered more often than others, such as giants, kobolds. What I'm going to do is actually take a little bit of a deeper dive in a couple of these entries to give you a better feel for what you're going to find. But for the most part, you're going to get information about where these monsters are encountered, a bit of kind of personality traits that are fairly common to these monsters, as well as what are their special abilities and what bonus actions do they have. One thing I will mention, as far as the dragons, we still have the colored dragons. We've got the chromatic dragons. So I know there has been a movement, especially as an example with Pathfinder Remastered, where dragons are a little bit different than they had been in the past. One thing you will notice is with the dragon entries here, the actual design of dragons is a bit different with Tales of the Valiant compared to 5e D&D. So we have quite a lot of dragon entries. We've got quite a lot of giant entries, demons, and so forth. So let's take a look at giants for a second here. And I am going to take a peek at the hill giant as a nod to the first role-playing game product I ever bought as a kid. If you follow the Gaming Gang show, my live streams, you know I've mentioned in the past that the first thing I ever bought for a role-playing game was G1, Steading of the Hill Giant Chief. That was in 79-ish, if memory serves. And the funny thing is, I did not realize you had to have the other books. So I just bought the adventure thinking, oh, hey, this looks pretty cool. Even though I had a friend of my older brother's sit with me as I rolled up a D&D character, although I never had gotten to play. But still, I didn't know that we needed, the player's handbook, monster manual, things like that. I don't think the Dungeon Master's Guide was out when G1 first came out. Regardless, as far as the hill giant, this slouching, brutish giant's hairy form is clad in crude hides. It wields a massive tree limb as a club, its broken branches poking out like spikes, and carries a satchel dripping with gore and buzzing with flies. Yummy. So it's going to talk about, where are you finding these giants? Where will you encounter these giants? More earthy than their cloud giant cousins and less sophisticated craftsmen than their fire giant cousins, hill giants dwell in palisaded settlements in the forests and valleys in the foothills of mountains. Their homes are typically made of loosely cut logs or uprooted trees, with some homes still sporting branches or even bits of roots on the exterior. They primarily live off the land, but they often take what they need from creatures smaller and weaker than themselves, seeing this as the natural order of the world. Talks about their mighty leaders, their gluttonous. So that gives you a bit of information to build a personality of hill giant opponents for your player characters. I like that quite a lot. And just about every entry gets this sort of treatment. We're going to get our stat block. Then we're going to get the special abilities that they've got, giant attributes, show of might, the actions that they can take, mostly in combat, as well as the bonus action. And the Hill Giant, as a bonus action, gets to use kind of a belly bump to knock characters up to 10 feet away and to the ground. So, as an example, that's the Hill Giant. Let's take a look at the Kobolds, because this is Kobold Press. And I happen to be a big fan of the Kobolds from Kobold Press. Some of these entries will have multiple pages. A lot of them are just a single page, very concise, very to the point. I like that quite a lot. We do also have multi-page entries for various different monsters that just need a bit more detail, a bit more background, or we might have different types of that creature. So that's what we see with the kobolds. These short draconic humanoids scurry out of the shadows, reptilian tails whipping back and forth with excitement. One grins mischievously while holding a contraption. Another twirls a dagger with eyes alert to danger. And the third lights a candle on its miner's cap. So these are practical minions. They are clever miners. They engage in scaly teamwork. And they make very good assassins and alchemists. Then we get some information about the kobolds. Get that stat block, their actions, because these are pretty weak. They get to use a dagger or a sling, and as a bonus action, they get to scurry. But then we'll also get information about the Kobold Swift Blade, the Kobold Tinkerer, as well as the Kobold Witch. Very nice. I really like how the kobolds are presented in the Midgard setting, which is effectively Kobold Press's home setting for their adventures and so forth, their region guides and that. I really like how the adventure campaign Empire of the Ghouls starts out, and we've got the kobolds. The kobolds are kind of second-class citizens. I like the details that go into the backgrounds of a lot of these monsters, a lot of these species in the world of Midgard. If you've never checked out Midgard, you owe it to yourself, especially if you're looking for something a little bit darker than Forgotten Realms, but still certainly not grimdark by any stretch of the imagination. So as you can see throughout, the artwork is excellent. Really love the artwork that's been used. I'll be very honest, I don't know if some of this has been recycled from previous Kobold Press releases. If it is, it's still really excellent. Check out that phase spider. Very, very nice. So just jumping on through here to kind of give you a feel for what's inside. And as I had already mentioned, there are over 400 entries. The succubus, the sturge, and obviously enough, anything that's under copyright to Wizards of the Coast is no longer going to be present for Kobold Press as far as Tales of the Valiant goes. Keep in mind, Tales of the Valiant, as I mentioned, is 5e adjacent. It is very 5e adjacent. So it's very, very easy for you to utilize these monsters in your 5e games as opposed to what's in the monster manual. And as I mentioned before, I tend to like the takes that Kobold Press has on many of these creatures and monsters better than I do Wizards of the Coast. So then we're going to get into the animals. These we don't really see a ton of images for. We have a few, but each one doesn't get an image because I think most of us know what an octopus looks like. Most people know what a panther looks like, and so forth. And then we'll get into the section which has NPCs. So relatively common types of NPCs that player characters would run across, such as assassins, bandits, bandit captains, knights. So we get quite a few of these as well. So then we're going to wrap up with our appendices, breaking down creatures by terrain, creatures by challenge rating, and then some advertising. So that is a peek inside Tales of the Valiant's Monster Vault. Let's swing on over to the other camera so I can share some final thoughts as well as my review score. I really, really dig the Monster Vault for Tales of the Valiant. Now, if you happen to see my review that I shared yesterday for the Player's Guide, you know I liked it. I recommend it, but I don't feel it's vastly different than 5e Dungeons & Dragons. I don't think it's unique enough to really put it in its own space. So, didn't give it that high a review score. On the other hand, the Monster Vault, this is the sort of release I expect from Kobold Press. It is excellent. Artwork throughout, fantastic. Production quality, sure, okay. The paper may not be as thick as we see with other role-playing game companies, but it is, at least to my fingers, thicker than the pages that we get with, say, a Wizards of the Coast book. The binding looks solid. I think this book should hold up to repeated use at your game table. And speaking of repeated use, you will get a lot of use out of the entries in this bestiary. Regardless if you're playing Tales of the Valiant, 5e Dungeons & Dragons, or some other 5e adjacent fantasy role-playing game, you are going to enjoy the various different creatures and monsters in this Monster Vault and get a lot of use from them. Now, I also want to point out, if I were running 5e Dungeons & Dragons, I would probably utilize a lot of these entries from the Monster Vault because I really do like Kobold Press's take on many of these creatures and monsters. So on a scale of 0 to 10, I give the Tales of the Valiant Monster Vault a 9 out of 10. I think it is that good, and I give it a very high recommendation. All right, that is it for this time out. If you liked the video, by all means, please give it a quick thumbs up. Subscribe to the Gaming Gang channel if you haven't already, and if you do subscribe, don't forget, ring that bell. It will not only let you know when I share videos such as this review, it'll also inform you when my live stream, the Gaming Gang Dispatch, airs Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday evenings right here on YouTube at 7 p.m. Central. And of course, when you're not watching videos on the Gaming Gang channel, be sure to visit thegaminggang.com for all latest in tabletop gaming news, reviews, and a whole lot more you are not going to find on YouTube. You know the drill. Get your geek on at thegaminggang.com. Once again, I'm Jeff McAleer. Thank you very much for watching. And until I see you next time, I certainly hope all of you get to enjoy plenty of great gaming with your gang.